Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 308 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. I have a nice little Monday bonus episode surprise for you today where I talk about a recent thermal hog hunt out here in East Texas. I was using a rifle in .300 Blackout on this particular hunt. Now that cartridge is a somewhat controversial choice that gets sometimes well-deserved hate for those who don't like it for hunting, especially for hunting big game. Even so, this particular hunt is a great example of the strengths of the little .300 Blackout when using the right bullets, under the right conditions, and with good shot placement. So we'll talk all about that here in a minute. Before we do that, the Big Game Hunting Podcast is about to celebrate its 5-year anniversary. In honor of crossing that milestone, we're giving away a hunt in Africa to a deserving military veteran, along with a literal pile of other amazing prizes for other podcast listeners. Now, in that vein, I want to answer a question I have received multiple times over the past week. Yes, people who reside in countries other than the United States can enter this giveaway. Now, in addition to that hunt I just talked about, I'm also giving away a Mossberg Patriot rifle, some Nosler trophy grade ammo, a Banish 30 from Silencer Central, a Meadowlark knife from Simbita Custom Knives, a set of Axle X-Core ear protection, some Spartan Precision bipods, and an autographed copy of The Perfect Shot 2 by Kevin Robertson. Listeners residing outside the USA unfortunately aren't able to win the suppressor, the rifle, or the ammo, but they can potentially win the X-Cores, the custom knife from Evan Simbita. The winner is responsible for paying shipping costs for the knife if they win that. They can win a Spartan Precision bipod. They can also win the copy of The Perfect Shot 2. So I hope that answers questions people from Canada, Mexico, Europe, Africa, all that stuff have. Yes, you can enter the giveaway. Yes, you can win some of the prizes. Click the link in the show notes and sign up there to enter in the giveaway. Now, if you have already signed up via that link, you may have received an email from me asking you to quote-unquote confirm that this is a valid email address. That email probably says something like, "Thanks for subscribing to my list. Before I can begin sending you content, however, I must first confirm that this is a valid email address and that you intended to subscribe. Please click here to confirm your email." I don't blame you for being confused or suspicious about that email. No, that was me. It's not a scam or a spam or anything like that. Just click that link if you still have it to confirm your email address and to tell my email system that you are a real person. Your entry in the giveaway is not complete until you do that. Now, in addition to signing up that way, you can get additional entries in the giveaway by reviewing the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, by tagging friends in my past and future Instagram posts about the giveaway, things like that. Details on the giveaway, to include how to nominate a deserving military veteran to receive that hunt in Africa, are in episode 306. Check it out for more information. There's also a link in the show notes from this episode to that episode so you can find it easy. Okay, let's talk about this hog hunt and the .300 Blackout. Now, I'm sure I've mentioned in previous episodes that I do hunts like this from time to time. I have access to some private land out in East Texas where I hunt, and that's also where I do most of my shooting. So I'm up there all the time at the range if doing nothing else. I mainly hunt deer there in the fall, but there are some hogs in that area, and I have trail cameras out, and I will make a trip over if I'm getting some consistent activity on trail cameras where I can pattern a hog or hogs. Well, I've had a couple of hogs hitting one of my feeders very consistently around the same time every evening last month. This happened back in March. So I planned a trip up there with my son to see if we could make something happen. These hogs were coming in during the evening. 2 medium-sized boars. They'd hit this feeder around, say, 6 p.m., sometimes a little earlier, sometimes a little later, and then they would hang out for a while. Sometimes they would stay as late as 7:30, 8 p.m. Usually they would come in when it was still light. Sometimes they'd come in right at dark or just past dark. And then regardless of when they got there, they would usually stay there for a while and then usually just ease on out of there and move on and doing the other things that hogs do. So with this in mind, I opted to bring one of my rifles with a thermal on this hunt. Now, as some listeners may recall, I shot a big boar last year with my 4.58 Win Mag using another thermal in conjunction with my Banish 46 suppressor. It worked great. But Since I had two hogs coming in together, I decided I want to bring an AR to increase my odds of getting both. Now, I have a Diamondback DB15 and 300 Blackout. I bought it a couple years ago. Not a high-end gun at all, but it works pretty well for the sort of hunting you would reasonably do with a 300 Blackout, especially in this area. I have a Pulsar Talion XQ35 Pro thermal scope mounted on that rifle, and it also works well, so I decided to take that whole setup on this particular trip. Now, the cool thing about that Pulsar scope is that it comes with, or at least the one I bought comes with, an integrated mount that fits easily on a Picatinny rail. So it's very easy to switch that scope back and forth between rifles that have a Picatinny rail. Now, I've messed around with putting that thermal scope on a couple different rifles since I bought it last year, but it has spent most of that time on my 300 Blackout. And then I had that whole rig all set up, ready to go since the end of deer season, this last deer season in 23-24, in hopes that some hogs would start hitting a feeder regularly during a time frame when I was available to go out after them. So because they started hitting this feeder regularly, I had a little bit of an opening in my schedule one weekend. My son and I made plans to go out there after school one Friday, hunt that evening, spend the night out there that night. If necessary, we could hunt again the next day. So we got out there that evening, unpacked real quietly in the area that we camp, and got ready to go. Snuck down to this particular stand, quietly got set up about an hour or so prior to the earliest times that the hogs would normally come on trail camera. He and I were sitting in a box deer stand overlooking this feeder. This particular area, we were down in, we weren't really in a creek bottom, but we were in one of the lower areas of the property in an oak grove. And we had a long, straight, narrow shooting lane, basically straight down the middle of this area, sitting at one end of it, feeders at the other. I could see maybe another 50 yards past the feeder. So the feeder was about 50 yards in front of me. I could see about 50 yards past it. And then there was a pretty dense grove of oak trees on either side of this shooting line. You can see into it a little bit, but not too much. So very simple setup. And it's going to, if anything comes out, it's probably going to be right in front of you here. But I'd gotten a lot of good activity here in the past. I shot a deer out of the stand a couple years ago. My brother-in-law shot a deer there too. Good number of hogs coming through there. It's a natural transition zone where it goes from that oak forest to an area that had been clear-cut many years ago that's much thicker, has a lot of pine trees in it, that sort of thing. So a lot of stuff kind of moves through this area. And additionally, we were on a little bit of a ridge. This wasn't a big ridge or anything like that, but this shooting lane was right on the top of this quote unquote ridge, and then it dropped off either side down into a creek bottom. We're looking basically straight north, and to the east and to the west of the shooting lane, it drops off, somewhat steeply there down into creek bottoms. There's a pond on one side and then a big creek on the other. So we're sitting here in this box blind looking at the feeder, and I look at my watch and I think, man, it's getting about the time might have one of these hogs come out. And I'm looking out there in front of me, and sure enough, I see some black move in the woods on the far side of the feeder. You could almost set your watch by them. They show up. These two hogs, and it was both hogs that showed up, just like they had been. They were on the other side of the feeder, messing around in the woods. Like I said, this is a lot of oak trees around there, so I'm sure they were just kind of rooting around, looking for acorns on the ground, anything else, and slowly just kind of making their way towards me. Now, I could see clearly two similar-sized hogs. One was a little bit bigger than the other. Now, the bigger one was acting nervous. He came out of the woods and looked straight at us, and that's the downside of this setup here, is that almost if anything comes out, especially if they come out from the north like that, they look at the feeder, and then they're looking at you behind them. So you got to be real careful. I think I moved, and I think this hog saw movement that made him nervous, and he didn't stick around very long. He came out of the woods to the northwest of me, crossed into this open area, messed around there for maybe 30 seconds, and then quickly moved into the woods to my northeast. So he crossed that open area, went back into the woods. I saw flashes of him a couple more times through the thermal on the other side. That was it. Now, the other hog, so this was the smaller one. They were similar in size, but one was definitely a little bit bigger than the other one. This one was also a little suspicious, but not so much as the other one. He came out, crossed over on the other side with his buddy. Then he came back, and after a minute or so, he came almost straight into the feeder. He would stop and look around and eat and move forward and look around and look at me, and then eat, then move forward, that sort of thing. And I guess he was hungrier, or maybe just not as smart as his buddy. So he came in and started eating in very close proximity to the feeder, the corn on the ground. Now, I kept hoping that other hog would return so I could get them both, but that's just not how it worked out, unfortunately. But that's the whole reason I brought that AR out there. I wanted to try and score a double on him, but oh well. But one hog is better than none. Now, like I said, I was on a small ridgetop. Terrain dropped away on both sides of this area down into creek beds. So with that in mind, I knew that this hog would be a real pain in the rear to recover if I shot him and then he ran 100 yards into the woods. So I wanted to be very particular with the shot that I would take. I waited for him to get as close as possible, and I could have shot him almost initially as soon as he came out of the woods, but I wanted to maybe try and get both of them. And then when I saw that wasn't going to happen, this one came in. I was like, okay, well, let me let him get clear of the feeder so I don't accidentally shoot the feeder or something like that. And I want him to present me a good shot angle. I wanted to get as close to broadside for a shot, hopefully stationary. Ideally, if all that worked out, I would shoot him right behind the ear, drop him in the tracks. Now, I've hunted a lot of hogs, and I can almost describe them as like they have ants in their pants. They don't hang around for long. Even when they're eating, they're just constantly moving around. They'll take a couple steps, put their head down, eat a little bit, take a couple more steps, eat some more, that sort of thing. And so they're not like darting around, moving fast, but it's just kind of a steady little movements here and there. And they'll pause, but usually not for very long. Sometimes they put their head up and they'll look around, but oftentimes, especially once they get into an area, get comfortable, get eating, that is where their focus is. So sometimes you can sneak up on them. I've done that plenty of times when they're actively engaged in eating like that. But that's just not how it always works out. So I was looking at this hog, and he was about 55 yards away. Not a very long shot, but it was on the long end of things for trying to get real precise shot placement, trying to hit something small like behind the ear or something like that. So I knew I could do it, but I just wanted things to be set up well for this. Usually when a hog comes in, they get comfortable and they'll stay there for a while. And so the deal is here not to get in too big of a hurry. You take a rushed, maybe borderline shot when if you would have waited a minute or two, with all the moving around that they do, they would have presented you hopefully a shot that was more clear with the sort of shot angle that you want, clear of any obstructions. If there's other hogs in there with them, you don't have another one behind it or in front of it or anything like that. So I kept tracking this hog, waiting for the perfect shot, but it just never really came. Then at some point, he decided he had enough after a couple minutes, and he started moving towards the woods to the east in the direction that his buddy had left. I figured it was now or never, so I said the heck with it. I put the crosshairs on his shoulder, squeezed the trigger. Now, he jumped at the shot, bolted out into the woods. I caught a glimpse of him in the thermal a couple times moving through the woods, and then he just disappeared. My initial reaction was, what the heck just happened? Please tell me I didn't miss this hog or shoot him and wound him, and I'm going to have to track this thing 300-400 yards through the woods to find him. Now, I felt pretty sure I made a good shot, but I often have some creeping doubt when something like that happens. Now, luckily, this pulsar scope gives me the ability, I can just hit a button and I can video everything that I see through the scope. So I was able to stream it to my phone afterwards. It's amazing, living in the future sometimes. And so I waited a few minutes, let things settle down, put that video on my phone from the scope, and then I played it back, confirmed I did indeed make a good shot. My crosshairs were exactly where they should have been when I fired. That hog clearly staggered at the shot, then he bolted into the woods. So that made me feel a lot better, and I figured, okay, I made a good hit on him. With a little bit of luck, I'll find him just a short distance into the wood line. So my son and I walked up to the feeder a couple minutes later to look for blood where he was standing. Now, we had gotten a lot of rain lately, and it was pretty muddy, so it was very easy for me to find his tracks, and there was a little blood on the ground heading in the direction where he ran. I could see where he was walking, and then I could see where he started running in the mud. And so this is a cool benefit, a side benefit of using a thermal when you're hunting. when you're in an area like this where you can kind of see into the woods, but not so much, right? Light is starting to fade a little bit, but it's kind of open and I can look around, turn on that thermal, start looking around, just scan the woods, and boom, there's a hot spot out there just 20, 30 yards away from me. Yeah, I look through the binoculars at it, look back through the thermal, and I can see something laying there with the binoculars, and it's very obvious that there's something pretty big and hot, just stationary on the ground out there in the woods. And I walked up on it. Sure enough, it was a hog laying there. So I have no doubt that I would have very easily found that hog. He only went, like I said, 20 to 30 yards in a straight line from where I shot him. Not very far, but he did kind of go down this little incline, and he, of course, fell down right into the middle of a small little creek or a little eroded area there where they would get some water runoff when it would rain. Even so, it wasn't that big of a deal to get him out, but like I said, it was cool being able to go just straight to him like that, finding with a thermal. Now, obviously, hunting with a thermal is not legal in every place. Definitely make sure that you're following the laws and whatnot, but that is a cool thing to be able to not only see game at night and potentially shoot it with it, but also be able to find it when all is said and done, too. This was an interesting case where I didn't actually shoot this hog at night. It was getting dark. I could have shot him with a regular scope at that point, but I was using that thermal because I thought maybe I was going to have the opportunity or the need to shoot something after the sun went down, so that's why I did that. But still, pretty interesting way to test out the thermals like that. In any case, we got him out of the woods, took some pictures of him, got him back to the cabin. He is now in my freezer. So all in all, not a very long hunt, and it went almost according to plan. Never goes exactly according to plan, but it went pretty darn well out there. And as it also turned out too, I put the bullet right on the X with this hog. I'll talk more about it here in a second, but shot placement was great. He didn't go far at all, and that was the end of it. Now, I was using a Diamondback brand AR-15 chambered in 300 Blackout, shooting Barnes Vortex 120 grain TAC TX bullets. I measured the velocity of that stuff at 2,125 feet per second. So just getting a little over 1,200 foot-pounds of energy, range 55 yards. That rifle only has a 16-inch barrel, and I was using my full-sized Banish 30 suppressor on it. Hog was nearly broadside, almost perfectly broadside when I shot him. I hit him in the right, his right shoulder was facing me. He was moving left to right. I put the bullet right on the shoulder. That bullet inflicted massive damage to his right lung. Then it went straight over the top of the heart, hit the quote-unquote plumbing coming off the top of the heart, and it caused a lot of damage, but not as much damage to the left lung than it exited. There was lots of pink, quote-unquote, frothy blood coming from the exit wound and from the mouth and nose of this hog. So textbook signs of a lung hit. I could tell immediately when I walked up to him on the ground that I hit him in the lungs because it was just a big bubbly red patch on his offside shoulder that was facing up when I walked up on him there. Now, this was an ideal use case for the 300 Blackout. Short to moderate range, like I said, only 55 yards. I was hunting deer-sized game, worked great out of a shorter barreled rifle that wasn't too bulky in a box blind like that. It worked great suppressed, not that loud, even with supersonic ammo, and even with that full-size 9-inch Banish 30 suppressor on it, since you're only putting it on a 16-inch barrel, the whole setup wasn't very big, and it wasn't that big of a deal to maneuver this rifle around inside that box blind and get ready for the shot. That bullet inflicted massive damage to the hog. And because I was using a semi-automatic rifle, I was perfectly set up for a follow-up shot. If things would have gone as according to plan, I could have potentially dropped that first hog with a head or neck shot and then got the other one. So in the past, I have had a few instances where I've shot a hog, dropped him in his tracks, and then I've had a couple seconds to shoot a second or a third hog in a situation like that, right? The first hog drops, and then all the other hogs just kind of freeze and look at that first hog trying to figure out what the heck happened. That is especially common when I'm hunting suppressed, and I've only seen it happen when I've dropped that hog with the first shot. If I shoot them and they squeal and they take off running, usually, even if the other hogs don't know what the heck is going on, they'll take off running with their buddy when they see that happen like that. They know something's not right, and so if their buddy's running away, they're going to run with them and figure out the rest later. Now, unfortunately, every other time I've had this happen where I've shot a hog, had him drop immediately to the shot like that, I was using a bolt action rifle, and I could not work the bolt fast enough or quiet enough to get a double. And so that's why I brought this particular rifle with me out there on this hunt. Now, as it turned out, the second hog never made it to the feeder, and when I shot this hog, he took off running, and he ran about as far as he would have with similar shot placement, probably from a bigger cartridge. So it wasn't exactly the way I wanted things to go, but it was still pretty cool. But looking, say, through the scope, and especially videoing it, seeing what recoil was like. Recoil was mild enough that I was able to get back up on target pretty darn fast. And I feel very confident that had I gotten an opportunity where I could have dropped this hog in his tracks and shot another one like that, I could have done it. It was fast and the recoil was not bad at all, anything like that. Exactly what I wanted for in those regards. Now, part of the reason why you're able to get back on target so darn quickly with a 300 Blackout like that is because it's just not that powerful of a rifle cartridge. Now, the fact that I was using it in conjunction with a suppressor like that Banish 30 definitely helped, but even not suppressed, that rifle does not recoil very much. So let's be clear here. The 300 Blackout is still a pretty lower powered round. It is designed as an improvement over the 223 and the 5.56, and it is, but it's just not a giant improvement. Now, people look at the 300 Blackout, I feel like sometimes, like it's a good, quote-unquote, beginner's cartridge. I look at it sort of like a 410 shotgun, which is also what people sometimes look at as a beginner's cartridge or a beginner shotgun in this case. But you can almost make an argument that both of these are better suited to be a quote-unquote expert's weapon than a beginner's weapon. Now, Robert Rourke said this in his essay, The Brave Quail, talking about shotgun bore sizes. The gauge of the gun is an index to the ability of the man to prove his manhood. If it's a 12 gauge, he's so-so. If it's a 16, he's pretty good. If it's a 20 gauge, he is excellent. And if it is a 410, he is bragging. Now, it's not that extreme with the 300 Blackout like it is with a 410 compared to a 12 gauge, but you get the idea. The 300 Blackout has light recoil, it works well in a more compact rifle, and it's also not that loud suppressed. But like the 410, that cartridge has a light payload compared to the bigger stuff in that realm. So those are the reasons, the pros anyway, that people would make this a beginner's gun. But those are also the cons of the cartridge and the shotgun bore size that make it more challenging to deal with. Now, I've mentioned in the past that there was a question, I think Ron Spomer talked about getting this one time, that a guy asked him about the suitability of the 300 Blackout for hunting grizzly bear, right? That is, I think, a ridiculous use case for the 300 Blackout. It's good for certain things. I guess there's worse things for hunting grizzly bear than a 300 Blackout, but I darn sure wouldn't use it for that. And this cartridge has a checkered reputation. Part of it is due to just the overall low-powered characteristics of the cartridge, but I think that reputation is largely due to the very poor hunting performance that the cartridge has with subsonic ammo. With subsonic ammo, it has lots of bullet drop, and it has very minimal terminal effects with a lot of that stuff. Really, I can't think of a worse round to shoot an animal with than a 220 grain full metal jacket subsonic round from a 300 Blackout. Something that is specifically built to expand at low velocities for hunting, like Hornady's Sub X, I think is a lot better than a subsonic full metal jacket bullet, but it's still not great. Now, you bump it up to a supersonic load, say like I was using here, and things improve a lot. But it's still just not a very powerful cartridge. I say, yeah, definitely can work for deer and for hogs, but it's just really on the light side for that stuff. For instance, Mark Floyd's son killed his first deer with a 300 Blackout. This happened during the height of the ammo shortage in 2020 or 2021, so their ammo options were very limited, and I know they really struggled to find ammo to go on this hunt. He killed the deer and everything worked out fine, but let's just say that experience was not a resounding demonstration of the power of the cartridge. And just for comparison's sake here, the 300 Blackout is a big step down from something like a 308 or even a 243. So that 120 grain bullet at 21-25 feet per second that I used on this hunt, you got about 1,200 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. The 243, 100 grain, typical deer hunting bullet that a lot of people use, you're going to get about 1,950 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle with it. The 6.5 Creedmoor is going to have about 2,300 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, so almost twice as much as the 300 Blackout. And a lot of 308 loads will have 2,700 foot-pounds of energy. So that is all quite a bit more powerful. Even the much maligned 6.5 Creedmoor, big step up from a 300 Blackout. And that is comparing those loads to supersonic 300 Blackout ammo. Subsonic is even worse. Hornady 190 grain sub-X bullet at 1,050 feet per second, you get about 465 foot-pounds of energy. That is handgun level power. Yeah, it's more powerful than a 9mm handgun, more or less comparable to a 45 ACP. So all handguns are pretty low powered. You can definitely kill animals with them. And I'd probably rather shoot a hog or a deer or something with that 190 grain sub-X from a 300 Blackout than I would go out with a 45 ACP. But neither one of them is what I would consider a great or a real quote unquote authoritative round, as Joseph von Benedict would say. Now the 300 Blackout, it is very, very important that you use the right bullets with it. I think those Barnes loads are just about perfect, and they're going to give you about as good of performance on a big game animal that you could expect out of the 300 Blackout. It's not great, but it will darn sure work. And if I had to pick one thing to hunt with out of the 300 Blackout, it would be that ammo. The 110 is also great. I just use the 120 grain stuff on this hunt myself. I have been less than impressed with the other 300 Blackout loads I have shot from other companies. Yeah, they can work, but the gel performance is so-so, and this also just matches up with the experience I have seen and heard about from listeners using that other stuff afield from other companies. So if you're going to hunt deer or hogs with the 300 Blackout, look real hard at those Barnes Vortex loads. I was very happy with how they performed on the hog during this particular hunt. 55 yards shot range here. I wouldn't shoot them that much farther than that. I'd probably go out to about 100 yards, and that would be my self-imposed limit with this cartridge in general on big game like that. But there's a lot of situations, like these situations that I do a lot of my hog hunting out here in. I'm not going to get a hog farther than that. And so you combine that knowledge of the limitations of the hunt that I'm dealing with here. I'm also not going to have an elk or a moose or a black bear or anything like that pop out. I'm looking at deer and I'm looking at hogs. I'm looking at close range like that. Combine those things with all of the other pros of the cartridge that I just listed, right? The how it works real well suppressed, how it works real well with a shorter barreled rifle, how it doesn't have a lot of recoil. You put in an AR or something like that, you can get a real fast follow-up shot. Yeah, it could work darn well under those conditions. So just another example of, one, the importance of matching your tools to the situation, and then using the right combination of stuff there, right? A good scope in this case, a good ammo, that sort of thing. Put it all together and you can have good results, really good results in this case. So I just made a post on Instagram with a photo of this hog. Make sure you're following me on Instagram if you're not already doing so. Then comment on this post, tag a friend, guess the weight of the hog for additional entries in my Big Game Hunting Podcast anniversary drawing and the prizes that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. Also, click the other link in the show notes to sign up for the drawing through the email list. Also, make sure you support me on Patreon. Free and paying members get additional entries in the ongoing podcast anniversary giveaway. However, paying members will also get to see video from this hunt in an upcoming Patreon post, along with some other photos showing the terminal effects of this Barnes ammo on this particular hog. So be sure that you're supporting me on Patreon if you want to see that video and see what that TAC TX did to the vitals of this hog. Let's just say those are the sort of photos that I can't share on YouTube or on Instagram or anything like that. But if you're a real nerd about terminal ballistics and you wanted to see up close and personal how that stuff worked and you want to see the video, then make sure that you are supporting me on Patreon. You can get instant access to that stuff. Okay, that will do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed getting this nice little bonus Monday episode. I will have another episode coming out this Thursday as usual. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to the BigGameHuntingBlog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.